Good evening and welcome to Viewpoint. Radio Gibraltar has marked its 60th anniversary and the Chief Minister has paid tribute, describing it as the soundtrack of our lives and an institution which has helped to cement the Gibraltarian identity. But is radio as a format more about nostalgia than anything else? In this digital age of music streaming on smartphones, is radio still relevant?
Well, nowadays when you go into a shop or a bar, a restaurant, supermarket, invariably the radio station that's playing in the background is Radio Gibraltar, and from the feedback that we receive, it's also being played at home and in people's cars. Radio is very fluid, and people can take it with them. It's transportable, so you take it in the car, you have it on your phone, whether you're listening on your app or the website. So wherever it is that you are, provided you've got internet connectivity, you can also hear us like that.
Radio is, I wouldn't say an old media, but it's been around a long time. So it's a faithful media. It's a familiar media, more than old. I'd go as far to say it's kind of a little bit retro when especially if you're on an old radio, putting in the frequencies rather than listening online.
I suppose it's just the accessibility, no matter where you are, whether you're listening from the app or from your car, from home, from work, it's the accessibility of having that news firsthand. You don't need to go online, you don't need to read about it, you don't need to pick up a paper, you can just hear it while you're doing your other day-to-day business.
With radio, I've always been taught that you're talking one-to-one. It's television is a little bit different because you're talking to an audience, but I've always understood radio to be as a very one-to-one medium. It's what we encourage the newer presenters to do, think that they're talking to just one person. They're not, of course. So hopefully they're listening to, they're talking to a few more. We have a few more people listening. But that's the only way you can create this one-to-one feel and connect with the listener.
Mm-hmm. Monday we'll see winds settling easterly.
As far as I'm concerned, Radio Gibraltar is Gibraltar's radio station. I think I've said this before. It's not just a station on the Rock of Gibraltar. It is a station that belongs to Gibraltar and its people. And of course it's relevant. It is of the community, and it's your voice too, another one of our jingles of days gone by. And that's what keeps it relevant, I think. It's not just the music. You have to be on the ball with the music as well. But the interviews and chatting to people and telling people some simple things like the What's On Diary. You want to inform people of what's around, what's happening in Gibraltar. We're all about us.
Do we know how many listeners Radio Gibraltar has?
It's difficult to tell. I mean, we can go by the most recent surveys, which have had us on about 70% of share of listening. And if you consider, we always say there's around 30,000 people in Gibraltar, you'd be looking at maybe just over 20,000.
That's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people. We're very pleased.
The radio, well, especially here in Gibraltar, I think the local radio, it keeps the community aware of everything. Going in car, I've got brief recollections of back in the day driving to school. Obviously, I didn't drive to school myself, but my mum driving me to school, we had Radio Gibraltar on, always a breakfast show. It was always something to look forward to, I suppose, for the morning drive. And I always remember thinking, wouldn't it be great to be a radio presenter? At that time, I thought it was a pipe dream, I suppose. No?
So much of Radio Gibraltar is actually delivered live.
Absolutely. First thing in the morning, all the way through the day, live, weekends, mostly live, all the bank holidays, Christmas. And I hope that adds to this feeling that there is someone there at the other ends of the radio and someone there that they can share their day with.
It's it's a real privilege, like people basically inviting you into their home, and it's really lovely to be accepted, and especially when you get feedback from people saying, I was listening and I really that really resonated with me or anything like that. My favorite example of this is Christmas morning, because Christmas morning is obviously a special time for families everywhere. And so when you're on the breakfast show on Christmas morning, and you imagine people opening their presents and being really excited and putting the turkey in the oven, and you're there with them on Christmas morning, which is incredible. It's really, really special.
Well, it's practically unrecognisable from what it was in 1974 when I started. At that time, we used to use records. We had reel-to-reel tape. And we used to relay the BBC World Service quite a lot, but not via satellite. This was the days before satellite. And it was, we tuned it in via shortwave, with all the pops, crackles, whistles, and you name it. that's the way it used to be. But technology has changed enormously since then. I think the relevance that Radio Gibraltar has, I think, is very strong, because at the heart of it all, it's by Gibraltar, for Gibraltar. It is the local station.
I've always said it's a privilege, to come in and do something that you enjoy doing. There's so many people that get up every day around the world and just don't like, the 9 to 5 or whatever they happen to be doing, and to come here to enjoy yourself. I think it's a case to a certain extent that if you're a people person and you enjoy meeting people, then every day is the same but different. So you'll be interviewing different people. If you're doing a program, presenting a program, then it's a case of sitting there and enjoying the music as well. So that in itself is great. The element of satisfaction, I think, is enormous. And I think I was saying earlier on today that when I first applied for the job many moons ago, I didn't even ask what I was going to get paid. It was pre-parity days, by the way, and it was peanuts. But it was fine, because once you're bitten by the bug, then I think it's hard to walk away from.
There are a lot of internet radio stations, and there are streaming services like Spotify. How does Radio Gibraltar deal with that competition?
It's difficult. It's something we think about a lot, but we have to realise that radio is different in the sense of what goes on in between the songs. And it's great that you can compile your own playlist of all your favourite music and with no interruptions in between. But sometimes those interruptions are what people are listening for. I mean, it sounds a very outdated idea, but I think it's still valid in 2018. There is a certain element of you have a friend in a box. And someone that if you wanted to, you can phone up. They live a very similar life to you. We're all based here in Gibraltar. We're not, on the other side of the world. So I think there's the difference between traditional radio and the newer streaming service is that intimacy.
And the format of Radio Gibraltar has moved with the times. When I became head of radio in 2005, that was my mission, to modernise the station, for it to have a very strict music policy, so that it appealed to the widest cross-section of the public that tune in to us, and also for presentation styles to reflect the general trend in radio in the UK in particular. And we brought in the services of a radio consultant who to this day still works for us, and that certainly changed the style, changed the way in which radio is done. And bit by bit over the last 10-15 years we've increased our audience share, and yes, Radio Gibraltar nowadays, I would argue, is more popular than any of its rivals around.
I think that's quite important in radio as well. Like you have to put yourself out there, and sometimes you talk about things that you wouldn't really think of telling people, or you think, people won't be interested in hearing about this, like a traffic jam or anything like that. But it's the kind of thing that people relate to, just everyday life. And so if you can bring an element of that into your features or your links, I think it's a massive help in creating good content. You've interviewed loads of people in the past.
Loads and loads.
Have you got a highlight?
I'm not going to name drop. Or shall I?
Yeah,
Go for it. Why not?
Rod Stewart was one I enjoyed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
really?
down at Marina, actually.
There was one, and it's quite a recent one, a gentleman celebrity type person, and I remember it being a really flirty interview.
Ooh.
Oh, me?
Oh, I think I remember that one, Ben.
Gosh, my name
Who
is going
was
to be
that?
blackened. I've only been on air for 5 seconds.
Yes, I remember that. That was quite recent.
Are you serious?
Yeah, who was it?
Yeah. Obviously, the most memorable thing about that interview was the
I'll
flirtation
remember-
that Ben and I can
I'll
remember.
probably remember the minute I walk out of here.
No, I remember. It was a really good interview.
Yeah.
I think I better leave before anything else happens.
All the chats are completely off the cuff as well, and nothing is really planned. So some days the chats go great, some days they kind of peter out towards the end. But yeah, it's always good fun, that's for sure.
I just think it's real and raw, and live radio. I mean, you can rehearse to an extent, but it's basically what's happening there in that moment, and you've just got to kind of grab that moment and go with it wherever it takes you. And so that's what I love about radio, and that's why I think it works so well.
Especially in a small place like Gibraltar, I mean, it's inevitable. You know, people recognise you in the street and just by your voice, and they tell you that they listen to your program. I mean, it's a great feeling. You know, there is a connection there. You know, different people telling you that they never miss a program. In my case, on Sunday mornings. Thing that so the connection is there. You know that it's there.
I think that's very much where our success lies. I mean, we are all about the community. I think it's fair to say that connection, that link, from the stories we carry, from the entertainment, from the chat. It's that interaction. It's, you have to have that relationship and that understanding to relate, because I think we're a very unique community, our culture, the way we do things, our daily routine. And I think that's where Radio Gibraltar can really play a part and really connect with the listener.
60 years of Radio Gibraltar.
Christine, you are naughty.
Why? You can't get it together.
You're going to make me cry after.
She's crying, actually crying.
It's not even 10:30.
Oh my goodness.
What am I going to do with you on my show today? So we put our neon leg warmers aside from the 80s. We're in our school uniforms, virtually, not realistically, although Christine has said she would have been up for that.
Oh yeah, I would have been up for that, pigtails and all.
I like to keep things very natural, and I've heard it described before that radio is your friend. Our previous head of radio, James Niche, said that. You can dip in and out at any time. You don't have to worry what mood your radio's in. You don't have to worry about choosing a playlist. The 3 songs you're going to hear next, you're going to know at least 2 of them. And going into a link or preparation, I just think it's really important to keep things very natural. And other people describe radio as almost an audio wallpaper. As I say, you don't want to load up a playlist or a podcast all the time, or if you're driving, you want to be able to dip in and out. And in the studio, it's very easy to think that people are listening to every word, but they're not. And it's to be able to create that sense of comfort that you can dip in and out at any time and be able to expect a good show and some fun. Mine's a music show, for example. I don't handle news. So I like to try and keep things light and very spontaneous.
We're very careful to make sure the music we play is familiar to people, as many people as possible. We can't go too young with the music. We can't go too old with the music. We have to think that the way people listen to the radio is maybe they dip in and they dip out. They don't necessarily listen all day long. So what we want people to have in that half hour or hour, maybe at breakfast time, maybe as they're coming home from work, when they're listening to us for a short period, we have to make sure that they're going to hear something that they're familiar with. If we fill that half hour with songs that they haven't heard before or aren't to their taste, I think they're much less likely to come back to us. So, arguably our music choice is safe, but I think it has to be like that to appeal to as many people as possible.
If you're broadcasting music that people don't want to hear, then they're not going to be listening to you. Simple as that.
I feel like I'm part of the community. I feel like people kind of rely on me to get them through that first bit of the day, that early morning when the alarm clock goes off and it's 7 a.m. or 7:30 or whatever time people are getting up. I like to think people kind of rely on that and need that to get them going. So that's the way I see it in my mind, and it gives me the impression that I'm making a bit of a difference. I like to think that I am, and I think it's also important to make everybody feel included. So, for example, I started a club. It was the Breakfast Club, and anybody can be in it. And once you're a member for life, and you can walk around proudly and say, yeah, I'm a member of the Breakfast Club, and talk to other Breakfast Club members, and like there's a little bit of a community on Twitter and things like that. So I think bringing people together and having fun is quite a big deal when it comes to radio.
Living on a prayer.
Yeah, for the most part of that 7.5 years I was on this show. So, yeah, it definitely felt like home. My mother, can I just say very quickly, my mother is absolutely delighted that I don't work here anymore, because it means that she can actually win. There's a rule that if you're a family member, you can't win a competition.
Yeah. I have to be honest with you, I base my show around nonsense. So it's something that really, really is important and drives me every day. Can I find a more nonsensical story than yesterday? I always set myself new targets every day.
What does Radio Gibraltar and radio as a format do better than other media?
Well, I'd like to think radio is still entertaining for people to listen to. There is the element of intimacy, what we were talking about before, this idea that you've got a friend. And even nowadays, to a certain extent, immediacy. If there's a breaking news story, maybe that we need to get out, we can do it there and then on the radio. Any subsequent updates that there might be, we can get it out quite quickly. People might argue that all of that is available on social media these days, but I think what people have to remember is that what is also on social media is a lot of speculation, a lot of gossip in these situations, and it's not always 100% reliable. Whereas what I think people can expect to hear on the radio is information that's been checked. We never put anything out until we know we've got the facts right. Now, sometimes that can give the illusion that we're a little bit behind social media, but I think it's perhaps it's worth waiting that little bit longer for news you can rely on rather than just speculation.
The investigation by the UK Gambling Commission, which covers the period between November 2014 and August 2016, found William Hill had gained £1.2 million as a result of customer activity linked to criminal offences.
In many ways, it's the go-to medium simply because it's the most basic form of mass communication. A radio signal can be transmitted instantly with very little effort on our part, in the sense that it doesn't require moving images, it just requires a voice and a transmission. And from the recipient's point of view, radio is just so easy to pick up with minimal equipment. And I seem to recall a promo that we did some years ago when there was a fire at the power station. We kind of reflected on it, and we realized that for most of the day, when the power was out all over Gibraltar and phone lines were out and telecoms masts were out because there was no power in the whole of Gibraltar, the only way that people could pick up a signal from the national broadcaster was to take out a single battery operated FM radio and listen to our radio broadcasts. So it's the default, whenever something big is happening in Gibraltar, it's the default method of mass communication for us.
What role do you think news plays on radio?
It's a vital role. I think it's just so important for people to have that one stop where they can not only get the entertainment value and the music and the banter and the content and the community news, but also the hard-hitting news as well.
I think it's extremely important, apart from the entertainment. It's obviously about bringing the latest to the listener, making sure that's factual and the rest. And that's what radio provides, that sort of instant connection. If a story breaks, we can put it on radio. Obviously, we've got social media now too, but certainly before our TV output.
The newsroom has one television broadcast a day. It has several radio broadcasts a day. And we are always thinking of the next deadline. And throughout the news day, inevitably, the next deadline is a radio one. So the treatment that we give radio stories, the treatment that we give radio news is a more immediate one because it's the one that's coming up next.
Just what's happening on the day, what's relevant. It could be, like, for example, someone winning an award, or perhaps a message that the police wants to put across about something important that the community should know about, delays at the frontier, a politician, reacting to the opposition, or vice versa. So it really just depends on the day. But I think that's what makes it such an exciting job, because every day is different. And I never really know what's going to happen at any given day, which is a plus.
I think Radio Gibraltar TV, GBC generally, has definitely been there with the correct information. And if anything happens, who do they turn to? It's always Radio Gibraltar. The tank fires. We broadcast overnight, and we had everybody with us during the course of the night.
Well, it comes to its own, doesn't it? Because it's the platform that's going to stay there for longer. Especially if you've got a battery-powered radio, and we carry on the air. We've got backup power supplies and all these things, so we carry on the air and inform people in a national emergency on what they have to do, what they should not be doing, because we'll be getting that information from the local authorities. So yeah, it really does come into its own, as it has done on several occasions during my time in radio. I can mention the IRA incident in 1988 when I was involved as a very rookie presenter at the time, and other people were on the air, but I was behind the scenes, and we were imparting that information. When the Cepsa refinery blew up as well on a Sunday afternoon, I was on the air that day when it happened, and immediately we started giving information to people on what they shouldn't do, how to keep safe. During the riots in 1995, keeping them informed what was going on, and more recently with the tank fire at North Mole, when again I was on the air through the night telling people what was going on and how they could keep safe, especially if you lived close to the area. Radio is where you can turn to for that information. Social media is all very well and good, very immediate, but it's very short, snappy statements. Whereas on radio, we can keep the conversation going and receive feedback as well. It's a two-way conversation, and even three-way, because we can also be providing information and receiving information from the authorities and their emergencies committee when they meet. So yeah, it's a crucial place, a crucial thing to listen to, radio, as I said, especially because we can carry on the air even if there are power cuts or whatever.
When the Anglo-Spanish talks on Gibraltar resumed in October 1966, and Britain proposed that the legal aspects of the case should be referred to the International Court, the Spaniards retaliated by closing the frontier to vehicular traffic.
Days when we were broadcasting, the border was closed, which is probably hard to imagine now, but the fact that families were separated, which is very sad, overnight, and then Radio Gibraltar played a huge part in keeping families together as well. There was no snail mail even then, and so it was impossible to get in touch with loved ones unless you were listening to Radio Gibraltar. Disco Dedicados with Maribel Cummings. That was, a fantastic program because it did make people come closer together, and that was very important.
I remember when I must have been 7 or 8 at the time when the frontier closed, and the one recollection that sticks in my mind is going down to Radio Gibraltar at the green doors of when you walked in. That was Radio Gibraltar, but the queues of people to put on go and actually fill in the dedications and the messages to the people who were living in Spain, because there was no communication with Spain at the time, as we all know. And that queue still stays in my mind. It's still there,
Mm-hmm. And easier to do than television, for example, in that scenario?
Fewer people. Television is much more people hungry. On radio, you've got one presenter, maybe somebody assisting, journalists. We need an engineer to make sure that we're on the air, pretty much. the more people, the merrier, of course, but pretty much you can do it with that. Television, you need producers, cameramen, vision mixers, engineers, journalists, presenter, the works. But we can do that as well, and we do. We can stay live with TV as well, and at any given moment, and call people in, and we've got protocols in place should that happen.
It's definitely easier to get a story that's just breaking out on radio. As soon as you've established the facts and you've got a credible source, what we try and do is get some information out there as soon as possible. For example, when there's issues concerning traffic, that's something that we can quickly put out there to really advise the public and those on the roads what areas of Gibraltar to avoid, if there's just been an accident, if we've got, some tailbacks due to frontal queues and so on.
Good afternoon. Another busy weekend, both at home and away. With only 50 days until the opening of the Commonwealth Games, local athletes continue training and competing in preparation for the international event.
You spoke about it a bit earlier, but let me ask you specifically, how has the way that we consume radio as listeners changed?
It's changing all the time. Medium wave, I think, is hardly heard by anybody these days. It's kind of our last bastion, because medium wave is a very resilient frequency and spectrum, wave band. So if the push comes to shove, I guess that we can still put our message across, especially in times of national emergency. FM is still there, still heard by many people, but now we also have digital radio, not hugely successful in Gibraltar. To be honest, it hasn't been marketed in a huge way by the owners of the digital transmitter, which is not GBC anymore. And that's something perhaps that needs to grow, because it's growing in other countries, and it's something that we need to devote resources to. Because eventually, as is already happening in other countries, Norway has already shut down its FM transmitters. There's no FM in Norway anymore. And that, I guess, will spread throughout the world, because that spectrum will be used for other things, mobile telephony these days, I guess. So yes, radio is being consumed differently, but it's online based. People will stream via the website or on the app or the channel's player, or indeed podcasts, as you mentioned before, and on-demand programming.
With Radio Gibraltar marking its diamond anniversary, the Chief Minister hosted a reception for present and former staff, managers and board members. In a short address, Fabian Picardo highlighted, among other things, the radio station's vital role during the closed frontier years.
As a radio jingle of the 80s proclaimed, Radio Gibraltar is at the centre of everything. It's our source of information and entertainment. In most households, it's of course the sound we wake up to, as we wait to hear what has happened whilst we've been asleep, what the weather holds in store for us.
GBC's CEO, Gerard Dauma, himself a former head of Radio Gibraltar, paid tribute to the staff and extended his thanks to the listeners for their loyalty over the years.
All audience surveys, that's all audience surveys that have been carried out to date, place Radio Gibraltar as the Rock's favourite station. Radio Gibraltar is proud to be the Rock's local radio station, a Gibraltarian station which has not stood still in time. It is that localness, together with a reliable news service and a brilliant music mix, presented by a group of professionals with a passion for radio, that makes Radio Gibraltar unique among the plethora of stations and online platforms that exist in this day and age.
So as we celebrate this diamond anniversary of a true Gibraltarian institution, we look ahead to at least another 60 years of radio, of more loving life on the Rock.
Radio Gibraltar also enjoyed a roadshow outside Parliament on Saturday. Head of Radio Gibraltar, Ian Daniels, said it had been an unforgettable weekend and a fitting tribute to a unique station and the community it serves.